A lot of beginners know Chinese vocabulary and grammar, but they still can't speak it. And from what I've heard for the people that I know are trying to learn Chinese, they just simply don't know what to practice. So today, I'm going to be teaching you a beginner speaking system that works even if you don't have a speaking partner. The first thing that I want to clarify is that speaking Chinese is not the same as having a conversation. But of course, as with any language, conversations are the end goal, but the real speaking practice is building patterns that your mouth and brain can repeat automatically so that when you do come into a context where you need to use those phrases or words in conversation, they'll come out naturally. But of course, if you only memorize single words, your brain may freeze when you try to speak. So instead, as always, you should learn through phrases. For example, you want to know the word 喜欢, like, but not just like, right? You can't really do anything with that. So you should learn it in terms of different phrases and different ways to use the word, such as 我喜欢 something. Like for instance, you could say 我喜欢读书, I like to read. Or if you want to say I don't like, since you know you 喜欢, then you can put it with a phrase like 我不太喜欢, I don't really like. 我不太喜欢读书, 我不太喜欢运动. And so 运动, if you guys don't know, is exercise. Through this manner, you can not only pick up on initial vocabulary that you know, but when you're trying to make these phrases, you're simultaneously adding words to your vocabulary that you may be able to use in different contexts and settings. Step 2 is one of the most crucial steps, and I typically like to think of it as 3 parts: read, speak, and modify. Pronunciation might be one of the most difficult parts of any language really, but in Chinese especially because there are just so many different tones and the characters are, all over the place. So for the method used in step 2, what you want to do is first read one sentence, speak it out loud, then change one word and repeat it. For instance, the sentence that we're working with is 我昨天去图书馆学习中文. So you would read that first in your head and then read it out loud. And then you could change it up a little bit, as I said, to kind of build your vocabulary and make different phrases from an initial root phrase. And you could say 我今天去咖啡厅学习中文. And 咖啡厅 is like coffee shop, right? And 今天 is today. 昨天 is yesterday. Through this manner, you're able to add so many new words that you know are very common, practically used. And so by putting them in a new sentence, then you can kind of associate it with,
okay, this is what that word means, this is the context in which I use it.
To continue with that process, you could change up that initial phrase as well. Instead of saying 图书馆, you could say,
where else do I study? Well, I study at the library, I also study at my home.
So you could say 我昨天在家学习中文. So yesterday I was at home learning Chinese. And if you want to make it even spicier, then you could change up 中文 with another word. Like for instance, if you want to say you were learning English, 我昨天去图书馆学习英语 or 英文. And so in this manner, see, you're using like one base phrase and you're expanding it to add in tons of different vocab words. And so once you have that base phrase down, then really all you have to be cognizant of is how to change up the actual vocab words that are within that sentence, since you already know the overall structure. And then of course, if there are any issues with your pronunciation or you're not sure how to pronounce it, you can just easily put that phrase into Google Translate or into a different software that you're more comfortable with to kind of hear how that phrase should actually be pronounced, and then repeat it multiple times. When you're repeating it, I also do recommend repeating it in phrases, unless of course there's a word that you're really struggling with, then I would definitely isolate it out to make sure that you have a solid grasp of being able to pronounce that word. But in general, just trying to repeat like maybe one sentence multiple times until you feel like your pronunciation is as close as possible to the Google Translate, which sometimes may not be the most accurate thing in the world, but close enough, I think. Or you can also try recording yourself and listening to yourself like the first time before you practiced, and then recording after you've practiced as well. And that will kind of help you get a gauge of, is my pronunciation improving? And sometimes you can't really tell when you're saying it, but then if you listen to the recording, then you're like,
oh, I caught myself, this may not be the most accurate way to say that.
And so step 3 is putting this into practice in terms of an actual daily speaking routine. Now, I'm a firm believer that for anything, you don't really need to do it for hours and hours on end to get good at it. You just need to be consistent with the input. So if you could just take 10 minutes out of your day to follow this routine, I promise that your Chinese speaking skills will improve drastically. So for the first 5 minutes, I want you to take one phrase and, as I just mentioned, expanding on it, changing the structure, changing the vocab, and making sure that your pronunciation is as close to possible as it should be. And then for the next 3 minutes, I want you to try to, perhaps describe what you're doing in the present moment, what is around you, what you see, what you hear, or even just telling yourself, kind of talking about your day in simple phrases, what task you completed. And that's kind of similar to task 5, but now we're not going with the same base structure. We're trying to add in a little bit more nuance, and that should help kind of make the phrasing slowly but progressively creating sentence structures off the bat without like a preceding base. That will help you kind of make speaking a little bit more natural, and even if you make mistakes, that's okay. Just really trying to describe and use your base previous knowledge to expand on that. And finally, in the last 2 minutes, you can try asking yourself questions and answering them. For instance, you could say like, what day is it today? 今天星期几? And then you could respond, 今天是星期一, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever day it is. You could ask yourself, 你昨天晚上吃什么了? What did you eat last night? Then you could say, 我昨天晚上吃了鸡肉还有米饭. And by asking yourself these questions, you're not only working on your skill to phrase questions in Chinese, but you're also working on your ability to respond to them, and that's obviously very crucial when you eventually do make it to a situation where you have to kind of follow up with a conversation. And in conversations, there are going to be questions asked and there are going to be answers. And so step 4 is when you actually get to talk to a person, whether it be like through a language buddy, or maybe you know someone that speaks Chinese, you can be like,
hey, I've been learning Chinese and I was wondering if I could practice with you.
Because there's no shame in that. In fact, I think a lot of people are probably very willing to help you. And of course, there are a bunch of language learning apps where you can be directly paired with someone. Maybe they know the language that you're trying to learn and you know the language that they're trying to learn. And that just makes a great combination in helping each other with the language learning process. But obviously, when you finally do make it to the stage of having actual conversation, I think the best thing that you can do is just try to keep it simple. You don't need to use any overcomplicated grammar structures. And sometimes it may be easier to start with, yes or no questions rather than open-ended or deep conversations, because obviously with a limited vocabulary, it may be difficult to express yourself. But obviously, it's just important that hopefully through the previous practice, you kind of have at least the basics down in terms of like, introducing yourself, asking fundamental questions like, where did you grow up? How's your day been? How are you doing? And once you repeat the same conversations and get familiar with the context, then your brain won't freeze and you won't feel like speaking Chinese is as difficult. And I think that with the practice as well, your pronunciation will have improved progressively, and that's also definitely a confidence booster when you're speaking to a Chinese native or someone who speaks the language fluent. But at the end of the day, the key thing that you want to avoid is waiting till you feel like you're good enough, till you're ready, till your pronunciation is perfect to begin speaking in the first place, or you feel like you have to get as much vocabulary as possible before you can even begin. And that is just simply not the case. You can start even if you're at square one from just introducing yourself, learning the basic phrases that you can just kind of recycle. You might not necessarily know how to change up the structure in the beginning, but I promise that with time and patience, you will get there eventually. So the key is just to start with small phrases and expressions and repeating them, slowly but surely changing up the structure so you expand your vocabulary set. And if you implement these little strategies that I introduced in this video, I promise that your Chinese speaking will improve and you'll get closer to being at a conversational level. If you're trying to improve your speaking, you might also want to improve your reading and expand your vocabulary as well. And I actually made a video on how to do that, which is also beginner friendly. So if you're interested, please feel free to check that out over here or here. I can't remember which direction. And for more content like this, please subscribe.